Remember I told you about the whole thing where data classification was now free to all customers? Well, just to riff on it a little bit more while our next guest is getting set up here, we made an acquisition back in 2020 during the pandemic. It was for a little company, and we went through several iterations of it. You might have heard it called DataSense and things like that. What we realized is that it was more valuable to us to build it in natively as an addition or as a feature to other things that we were doing, as opposed to just selling it as some standalone product that you could buy. But for data classification and things like that, I think it's important that we spend some time on that during this second half of the session while we talk about cloud, cloud ops, and cloud storage. So I wanted to bring up one of our Ateam members. He's been a long-time Ateam member. Friend of mine, friend of the show, Mr. Paul Stringfellow, a.k.a. Stringy.
Hey, Nick. How you doing?
How you doing, Paul? It's good to see you, man.
Yeah, no, I'm good, man. It's hey, this is quite a setup you've got here.
We've done well with what we could.
You're bezel heavy, which is important, I think.
Well, we could not have day 2 at Insight all about the hardware, and I'll give you a couple of seconds to reflect as well. The last 2 years have been pretty impressive with the refresh that we've done. We've gotten to this kind of stasis point now, comfort level. Everything's refreshed. Everything's up to date. One or two things still stand out in my mind that we still got to get, but we'll get there. Where are you at with the hardware systems where they're at today? Do you like where things are at? Are you feeling good about where the updates have come?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think so. There's been a good focus on things like capacity flash. I think that's been an important part. It's making that idea of high-capacity flash, it's making it affordable, it's making it usable. The work I do, I work a lot with kind of mid-enterprise customers, and I think it's really easy for vendors to get excited by the enterprise, the guys who are coming along and buying petabytes and petabytes. But there's a massive market for people buying tens of terabytes, so 40, 50 terabytes of storage. They need an in, and they want to do it with flash. There's loads of reasons they want to do it with flash.
Yeah.
That might well be... it's about capacity, it's about speed, but it's also about sustainability. It's about the energy costs of running it with flash. So there's loads of great stuff there. So yeah, it's nice to see that hybrid systems have still got a place. I think there's still cases for that. We're starting to see really interesting moves around using ONTAP as kind of a data, so disk-based systems as a tier for flash in a flash pool. Yeah, great model. So hey,
bezel sitting right in front of you.
Like I was paying attention.
Yeah.
So that kind of stuff's great, and it's doing a really good job. It's interesting. We're just having a conversation off air with a couple of guys here about customer experience. A big part of customer experience is recognizing your customers are at different places, and your customers need different things. We can't just all run around saying, actually, what our customers need are massive, many petabytes.
Yeah.
There was some stuff this morning about the NVIDIA solution.
Yeah.
Well, not all of our customers need NVIDIA. They're not all doing AI on-prem. They just want to have somewhere to keep the data that's secure, that understands the data. They can build, they can back it up, they can DR it off to other sites. They need to be able to do that. So, but you can only do that by keeping your hardware refreshed and up to date, because it needs performance, it needs scale. And we can't still be running systems we're running 7 or 8 years. It's like running a cell phone that's 7 or 8 years old. Nothing stops. I know, as somebody who's just changed a 7-year-old smartphone, you forget.
7?
Yeah, man, you forget how bad it is.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. You think it works until you realize it didn't.
I'm still on a iPhone 13, and I keep getting the peer pressure poke.
Yeah.
Yeah, why haven't you upgraded yet?
Yeah, but
I don't need to. It's fast enough. It's fine.
Yeah, you're mainly getting the peer pressure of Apple telling you it's about time you had whatever we're up to.
Our community manager likes to rib me a little bit too, because he has to be the first one in line to get the newest phone every year. But anyway, I wanted to talk to you today. I was just discussing cloud with Sean.
Yep.
And when we talked before the show, you mentioned classification. Blue XP classification was something that you were really sort of passionate about, excited about. I have mentioned several times, both yesterday and today, that it is free to all all NetApp customers that are using Blue XP. Tell me your take on it. Tell me why are you so passionate about it? What do you think it's going to be? What's so game changing about it?
Yeah, so good question. So I think let me apply a little bit of context. So, so the work that I do most of the time now is around data strategy. So, it's a lot of work around things like security, how we're going to run our data, and big parts of that are things like governance, it's understanding what the data is, it's security. So, these are big parts of understanding your modern data, data footprints. We talked before about, hardware refresh and understanding the kind of hardware you need inside of an organization. You can't do that if you don't understand what your data looks like to start with. So, for those who maybe don't know, so data classification, as Blue XP data classification that we've got today, was Cloud Data Sense. That came from a NetApp acquisition maybe 5-6 years ago.
It's 2020, yeah.
Yeah, and the reason that NetApp did that, and actually bought a really smart product at the time, was because what we were seeing was this kind of real big uptake around the world of things like GDPR, California Data Protection Act, these kind of data protection acts that was suddenly putting a real focus on businesses to say, you need to get your data house together. You need to understand what data you have, how you're using it, what information you hold about people. So this drove a real interest in these kind of tools. And it started to change the way that people thought about the data and the information that they held. And it was no longer acceptable for businesses to have that data. And, because bearing in mind it's information about me and you that a lot of these companies hold, where you're not allowed to hold that information if you're not going to treat it seriously. If all you're going to do is put it in open repositories that the world and his mates, as we like to say, would come along and be able to read, because we wouldn't do that with our information. Why would somebody else do it? So, but you can't build that kind of protection and security without understanding the data, and that's where data classification is so important. It was funny though when you said to me about coming on to talk about that. The first thing I thought was, nobody will want to hear about this because it's not AI. It's just not cool enough.
We talked about AI a lot yesterday, but
I
think that's completely we're never going to talk enough about AI. There's so many to cover. But I think we made the point yesterday as well, exactly where you're going, that I always say no data, no AI.
Yep.
But I think you could even take that further and say, if you don't know the data that you're working with, we spent a lot of time yesterday talking about curation and being a librarian and a custodian of your data.
Yep.
So that when you do get classification and you do have all of that metadata available, then you can do something extremely valuable, extremely rewarding with that data using tools that are driven by, whether it's generative or whether it's RAG or whether it's these Nemo integrations and things like that. Like, I look at this, regardless of what the AI solution is, you can't do that properly, accurately, or well without some kind of curation that's ongoing.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. And I was saying before about kind of what drove my interest in this area was this kind of the rise of data security frameworks. So GDPR for me, based in Europe. But what's driving this kind of second wave of interest in this is exactly the things you've just talked about. You're absolutely right. No data, no AI. We're at a conference here where we've been real AI heavy. That's no surprise. Every tech conversation I have with any vendor, AI is going to play a part of that, and rightly so. There's so many use cases around how we can use. And when we talk about AI, we're normally talking about generative AI right now, large language models. So things like the ability to use natural language query, that kind of thing, to extrapolate further insight and information. But none of that happens if the data set, as you were just saying, if the data set that's getting fed into those engines is garbage. IT's long had a phrase, me and you have been around long enough to know garbage in, garbage out.
Yep.
All AI does is garbage in, garbage out so much quicker and at so much larger a scale. More garbage out,
Yeah.
And so if we're not curating the right kind of data, when we haven't got that information, and that's where Blue XP classification in kind of NetApp's terms, but that's why it's so important, and it's driving this kind of second wave of interest in this, because businesses are starting to realize two things, I think. One is, if we're going to use these kind of Gen AI models, we can only use those models if the data that we're feeding into them is good, it's relevant, it's current.
Yeah.
We've seen use cases where non-current data has got organizations into trouble because they've got chatbots working off old data, giving incorrect answers and finding themselves in court. There's examples of that over the last couple of years. So that's important. But you've got this other side of it, which is, what are we letting our Gen AI models look at? So if you look at something like Microsoft Copilot, people are looking at Microsoft Copilot, turning it on in their organizations, and all of a sudden going, whoa, what's Copilot looking at? And understanding what Copilot is looking at. And that's, so we saw a great example actually in the keynote yesterday here of Data Explorer.
Yeah.
So part of Blue XP, and I'm fascinated with Blue XP coming really central to everything NetApp seem to be doing. But what was really interesting with that was the ability that if you've got your data sets managed by Blue XP, you can now do a natural language query to say, tell me a bunch of stuff about the information I've got. That's real cool. Doesn't happen if we don't classify the data in the first place. So, maybe that's probably why I'm passionate about it.
This is only getting more and more important. So, at the risk of repeating myself to the audience, I'll say it. 20% growth in customers, 114% growth in total cloud storage. We've exceeded an exabyte, and 3 out of 5 new customers are new to NetApp. This is all in the cloud. And I think this is where this becomes really foundational, because a lot of this data here's the crazy part that's a bit of a mind job. A large percentage of this data that's new in the growth is generated by AI.
Yep.
The very thing that we're trying to contain and keep our hands around and make sure that it doesn't go crazy on us. But at the same time, if it's generating junk data off of junk data, we're just compounding an already existing issue. So it becomes even more important that if you're going to do a solution like RAG, if you're going to leverage your own internal existing data sets, take the time to clean it up first.
Yep.
Do some housekeeping, right? Do you really want it talking about stuff from referencing stuff from 1998? Maybe you do. Maybe you don't. I don't know.
Well, if we were doing that, we would have been talking about how we just refreshed to a FAS 270.
Right.
There's one for the kids.
Right. Well, I don't know if it's here this year, but we brought the FAS 400, the OG one, last year.
Wow.
We found it in the archives. It's like the Ark of the Covenant. We dug it out of the warehouse, right? I don't know. Haven't even got to walk the show floor over there to see if it made it back this year, but to be determined, I suppose. We were actually going to try and fire that thing up. Fun little side fact. Maybe we'll try and do that in a video sometime. Paul, what are some of the things above and beyond classification and some of the new hardware models that have stood out to you? Obviously, the AI stuff you mentioned before, but anything else that you're really keeping an eye on in the industry as a whole that has really piqued your interest above and beyond AI?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of my roles. I do some kind of broader work looking at the industry in general. And a lot of the work I've been doing has been around kind of human and data centric security. So a lot of the security conversation here has been really interesting. I think it's, there's some conversation this morning in the keynote about kind of the ransomware protection that sits on top of ONTAP. And while, again, there was a little bit of an allusion to AI in terms of using that to make it more accurate, that's an important part of how AI is getting used in security. But things like that, security being a foundational level. NetApp have been using this term. I think it's the most secure storage in the market, a phrase similar to that. Sorry for the marketing guys, whatever your phrase really is.
Oh, I mean, we didn't say that. The NSA said that.
So, well, that's, whatever the NSA says must be good. Who are we to argue?
Right.
But that kind of thing's really important because the conversations I have with customers are around the security of my data, that information that I'm holding. We see increasingly how customers of those businesses, so my customers, it's their customers asking them, hey, before I give you business, what are you doing around security? So I think that's a really interesting part of what, and it's interesting to see how NetApp are building that into their kind of day-to-day activity and have taken it really seriously. It's a part of ONTAP, it's a part of Blue XP. And beyond AI, I mean, I kind of touched on this earlier on, that it's been really interesting for me to look at the way that Blue XP is becoming so central to everything NetApp's doing. I sat in some stuff yesterday where they were talking about some of the capabilities of Active IQ going into Blue XP, the ability to push out ONTAP updates from Blue XP. Some of these kind of things are things that, when we've been around NetApp as long as we have, these are things that you're thinking, wouldn't it be great if we could do that? And suddenly you're looking at the platform and going, actually, that's great. We can start to do that kind of thing. So that's really interesting to me. That kind of, because I think when we're working with as much data as we are across such wide infrastructures in so many locations, NetApp can put data absolutely anywhere, on-prem, in the cloud, we can do all of those things. We need tools that can scale in the same way that our storage can scale. And actually, on-prem tools aren't the answer to that. Customers don't want on-prem tools. They want SaaS tools. They want SaaS management platforms. That's something else that I'm seeing in the work when I look across the security industry. Actually, people want SaaS solutions because it's SaaS infrastructure a lot of the time they're looking after, but they just don't want the pain of putting stuff on-prem, and they don't want to have to manage environments because they've got 60 other environments they're already managing. So so I think that's really struck with me so far, is that kind of Blue XP core to everything. We talked about how data classification is part of that, but so many other things are as well. So I'm fascinated to see how that's going to kind of develop out as we go.
Yeah, and I think it really plays into a big way that we as Americans might not be exposed to as much, because we don't have near the state level, border level regulations that you do, similar to like in Europe, where every country has its own rules around sovereignty, what can and can't go out, all that stuff. Where does it have to be located? Like, imagine, guys, for you, those of us in the States, imagine if every state and the borders of that state had their own data that couldn't leave those borders and had to be stored in the. It would be a nightmare for us to deal with, especially with 50 of them. Not to mention the 20 or so countries that are in Europe. So, I look at it as it's not something we have to deal with as much over here unless you're an international company like NetApp. But at the same time, I think it really can influence how we can help the rest of the world and really centrally manage where that data is going with things like classification.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's absolutely essential to that, because I think again, if you don't know what the data is and where you've got it, how do you know that you're not breaking?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, classification, a huge driver has been regulatory compliance, and having that just baked in as as people know, this is now, if you're a NetApp customer, Blue XP classification is just a thing that you've now got. So to be able to have that ability, and the reality of it is, might not, in some instances, it perhaps doesn't give you all the things that you need to be able to do. But if you're not doing anything and you've just got that baked, it's like with the ransomware stuff. That's not a ransomware prevention strategy in itself. But the fact that you've got that baked into ONTAP, solves a huge problem for people, and it becomes part of your strategy. There's a great example of how extending integration with SIEM platforms, they're shown on this main stage today. Again, absolutely crucial, because we've got so many systems. What you don't want as an organization is to have 17 different places to manage these things. You want it in one place where you can orchestrate your playbooks, you can build in your responses, and that gives you consistency and actually kind of bouncing around security and classification. Big part of that is consistency. The example you were giving before, consistent approach to where I put my data, where it needs to be located, because I've got data sovereignty, data locality requirements. I need to make sure that the data I hold only lives in the places it needs to be. It only gets seen by the people and the AI engines, and it needs to be able to see it. But you can't do any of this stuff. You can't secure and govern what you don't know.
That's the unknown unknowns.
Yeah.
It's the phrase I like to use, because you don't know you have a problem till you have a problem.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that classification and even generative AI and certain RAG solutions could help solve is some of those unknown unknowns that any company with any kind of legacy of data might have, being able to scan for all that stuff. Stringy, this has been great, man. I really appreciate you stopping by. I look forward to working with you some more, and I hope we can have you on again at some point.
Yeah, hey, love to, and thanks for having me on. Appreciate your time, Nick. It's been good to see you.
Thank you, Paul.